All right, I think we're live. We are at TED headquarters.
Instabase World Headquarters.
Representing TED quarters. I just landed in San Francisco and I was put right to work producing this podcast. So
came in like a tornado.
Yeah, I know. It's I haven't even unpacked my bag and I have my organic shakes.
The product placement end to end. This stuff is amazing.
This sponsored by whatever this is. We don't get any money. But yeah, I mean, what do you want to talk about?
I'm so excited you're here. So here's what I was thinking. I was really hoping that you could help me sort of unpack a thought that I've been having about sustaining innovation.
Sustaining innovation.
A high growth startup.
In a high growth startup. All right. Seems like that seems like one of the most important questions.
It does.
And I think customers are making money.
I think it's trickier than I imagined too, especially like coming from a research environment where that's sort of the name of the game, is coming up with new ideas. You realize that ostensibly a startup is a place where this happens, but commercially. But it's not entirely true, because very quickly, once you start growing very fast, you realize that you're in some ways just as entrenched in your current customer base, your current feature set as the big players. And so you have to figure out a way to stay nimble.
Yeah, I was just going to say, open it up with a curveball of like, why is it necessary to sustain innovation? Like, isn't it, it seems like if you got something going, why don't you just, there's so much to implement and do that, maybe startups aren't the place to try really, really new ideas because you want something that's tested and tried.
I think this is an excellent question, and one that I'm not sure, I think I know my opinion on, but I think it is one of the scoping questions, which is, some people, I think, would argue it, a startup should innovate on one thing and only one thing, and then everything else should be plain vanilla.
Right. You should do your accounting. You should not innovate on accounting or office management. You should just outsource that and get the right tables and right accountants done. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, and like you shouldn't have, on the technical side, you shouldn't have the not invented here syndrome, especially as a startup. Use the standard software for everything except for your core thing. But then on the flip side, when you think about it, startups are delicate, like Johnny Ive, I guess. I can't remember the exact
Those ideas,
quote.
The Steve Jobs eulogy with ideas are really delicate.
They can be squashed so easily. And to some extent, I think if you're in it for the long term, if you really want to show up to the big ball game, you've kind of got to be a whack-a-mole, where you have to make sure that if one of your competitors or if an incumbent were to whack you down, then you just pop up in three other spots.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes that's within the same product, sometimes it's different products. So in any event, I think for our perspective, so Instabase, to kind of give you context into which we're unpacking this, we're building a platform of apps. We think of it as an operating system. In some ways we actually mean it, in some ways it's a metaphor. It sits on top of your cloud, and each of the apps in this operating system pursue different kinds of unstructured data manipulation, different kinds of automation, different kinds of automated decision making. And you can sequence these apps together to solve problems. And so from our perspective, we do have a little bit of a built-in go-wide element to it. Because we're building both the OS, but then also the apps on top of that OS.
Right.
So then the question becomes, do we double down, triple down, quadruple down on the apps that are the bread and butter of current use? Or do we continue to explore wide and develop new apps? Or how do we balance the difference? So I think this is the situation we find ourselves in.
And is there an analogy to this in the pre-cloud world? Like, is there like was this Windows? Was this, Linux? What was the, precursor to this, 10, 15 years ago? What would, if you tell the old timers, they'd be like, we made this in the 80s. What would that?
That's a good question.
We don't have to go too super deep on this.
Well, so certainly, when you think about kind of how do people talk about this problem, it's definitely the tension between, I suppose you would call it disruption or maintenance, is a really known and well talked about problem. And there's a couple, I think, worth pointing out existing models. There's many, but a couple of models that people do use. So like the Innovator's Dilemma is one example. So Clayton Christensen wrote the book, and it observes many things, but one of them is that there's this natural S-curve of technology, where at the beginning, gains come very rapidly, but your revenue is very low. And then at the end, your revenue is very high, but you're kind of iterating very slowly.
This is individual company.
In an individual company,
not the whole
individual
technology. So it's an individual. So there's a bunch of these companies at different points.
But I think industries as a whole too. Right. Like one would argue that desktop computing largely is at the top of the S-curve.
Or like enterprise databases, however many years ago, and now with cloud and stuff.
And I think the observation is structural. And I think actually this becomes key, at least in terms of how I've been trying to unpack this thought, is that there are these you can look at these situations structurally. So the structuralist observation from the S-curve is that the large enterprise is disincentivized to pursue some of the more experimental, some of the lower on the S-curve technologies, because the kinds of profits that they'll reap, at least in years 1, 2, and 3, are just a drop in the bucket with respect to the kinds of numbers they need to push when answering to their board, to their stockholders. And so it's not worth their time. But then the problem is, and here's sort of like the catch-22, by the time the industry or the new idea is proven, it's too late. And some upstart has become the incumbent.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, just to interrupt for a second, I mean, this is like the story that corporate research labs try to pitch, right? As, to management, is that they want to head that off. But, I think companies have had mixed success in reaping the benefits of their own corporate research labs. But, the researchers want that story, right? They're like, the whole point of letting us do this blue sky work and this R&D work is that we'll hopefully be ready. And then oftentimes, they invent these great things, publish these great papers, and push forward the industry, but the original companies, right, end up notoriously not benefiting. Xerox, great example.
Right.
AT&T, a lot of examples, and that new upstarts do benefit, right? So Apple's the classic, Apple, Microsoft are the classic examples in the PC age. So it's
and how does Apple? I actually don't know how they organize their R&D.
I mean, I think they've been trying to hire much more AI folks lately, and they're trying to go into the public, more publishable route. I mean, that's what they've been making more public releases about. But traditionally, I mean, in a way, I don't obviously know internally as Apple, but maybe they have been very successful in transferring their advanced development R&D because they don't worry about being an academic lab. For the past few decades, they're notoriously secretive. I'm sure they have top people working on better batteries and better camera and sensing technology, and those really go into products. Whereas Xerox PARC's the classic example of they ran this awesome lab that was great for computer science and the whole field, but the company itself didn't really end up profiting too much. Of course, they actually made a lot of money off the laser printer, so that itself actually paid for Xerox PARC pretty well. But it's like they could have been, that the story goes, they could have been, the Apples and the Microsofts, right? But they were fine as a company from the ROI perspective. Xerox PARC, like that, the patents and the production of laser printers, that technology coming out of Xerox PARC really just paid for itself. But it's like, it's this just so story of, they could have been much bigger and such. But anyways, going back to disruptive.
Well, I think, and there's a great government analogy about this too with DARPA. And so Safi Bahcall has this great new book. I think it came out this month.
I don't know about this.
Loonshots.
Oh, interesting.
So he kind of goes on to make essentially like a structuralist argument for how you can, do various things like increase Dunbar's number for your organization or kind of build innovation into your organization by setting key structures or incentives. And he talks a lot about Vannevar Bush, who I don't think he was the head of DARPA, but he was instrumental.
Well, it was called ARPA back then, right? So without the defense part, right? So that was the Cold War. Yeah, so the ARPA, Vannevar Bush and, Licklider and a lot of those early influential people, that was huge. And also because it was a time when the government wanted to invest, in the Sputnik and the space race and everything.
Manhattan Project.
Yeah, so like all that was in the air. And it's interesting because that IARPA and ARPA stuff, that founded the early internet and all that stuff. And all those people went on to be at places like Xerox PARC, and they diffused into Bell Labs and Xerox PARC and all that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting history behind all that. But that was, 50 so years ago.
The parallels make a lot of sense then, because so a lot of what Bahcall talks about is how Bush apparently, he kind of seemed to staunchly believe that you needed to completely separate out the innovative arm versus the kind of production operational arm. And that's why, like I got my start in industry working for like a DARPA R&D shop.
Was it BAE? No,
BBN.
BBN, that's right. Yeah.
They were one of the early ARPANET folks. And it was fascinating on these DARPA projects because what DARPA would do is, the joke that we would always say is if you succeed too much, then you'll be fired. Like you'll get cut from the funding because it clearly means the problem wasn't hard enough.
Right.
And so they would spin up multiple teams. They'd have parallel teams working on the same problem, and then you'd have these checkpoints where they would even recombine you. So like you and I might be competing against each other, and then next week, ta-da, we're on the same team. And it was this controlled innovation, totally protected from how we're actually going to use it in the real world to get us to space to fail.
And it was like, and it seems like from the management perspective, it seemed like it was like a controlled nuclear reaction, right? You don't want it to go kaplop, but you want the people to be mixing enough, and you kind of, it's like you have the control rods so they don't go too far together, but you don't want them too far apart either.
Exactly. So there's these structural ideas too that are impediments, and then there's also cultural ones. So like some of the, like Hamilton Helmer, he was I forget the name of his firm, but he was a business strategist that helped with, I think, Netflix's creation and some of the other tech companies. And he has this book, I think it's called The Seven Powers, and he talks about how it's about strategy, like templates for how to identify what may be strategic or what may not be strategic. And one of the things he talks about is this idea of sort of situations in which culturally a company will be averse to innovation because it's either that's not how we do things, or the cannibalism problem, like that might eat into the story we've been telling customers or our profits, or this counter-positioning problem, which I think is sort of his like signature
What is
theory.
your counter-positioning?
So counter-positioning, I think I can get this right, it's essentially a situation in which it's largely a problem felt by incumbents. And so it's a situation in which some incumbent has a particular way of doing business, and that has resulted in a particular set of relationships and revenues.
Right.
And an upstart finds some way to dance around them such that were the incumbent to reciprocate and release an identical good,
I say.
it would so severely off-rail or derail their existing business that they're going to just say no to it, even if it is economically advantageous. So like the classic example is Vanguard. So Vanguard's famous for these low load, is that the word? Low mutual funds.
Yeah, funds, yeah.
And at the time, the folks who, I don't know the financial terms, like the folks who would manage this stuff would exact a certain percentage, month over month or year over year or something. And Vanguard essentially, I think their core innovation was the ETF, or not the ETF, the index fund, where there's very little fee.
Right, it's electronically managed and all that. Yeah.
Great idea, makes total sense, but the existing incumbents in the industry can't reciprocate because their whole model is based on the fees. And so it's a way to basically, it's almost like a cultural and structural way, because there's this feeling of, hey, that's not how we work, that's not how we do things, that's not how we organize our business, but there's also a very real bottom line component to it. So, I mean, I guess it's hard, I guess, is the observation.
So as a startup, you'd want to find those flanking maneuvers.
Exactly.
So that's one thing you want to find, so that even if, Oracle or Microsoft, whatever, even if they could just squash you instantly, they're not going to do it because it just is not strategically in their advantage to do that. And is there any case where someone at these big companies and incumbents are like, let's just screw it and do it anyways, because we know this, it's like a game theory thing. Like, we know this flanking thing exists. We know we're not supposed to do this, but we'll just take the risk and do it anyways.
So I mean, I kind of don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to figure this out for us. But to the best of, at least how I seem to see the way people interact with this, it seems as if the big players have two big picture approaches. So one is structural in composition, and it's let's create subsidiaries, or let's create multiple brands. So this is how you see the same car conglomerate having multiple auto lines.
So that their brand doesn't have to compete. Campbell, I see. Yeah. It's like we have the low-end Saturns or whatever. We have the high-end, Oldsmobiles or whatever, right? And it's like, below it's the same company. I don't know if they're the same company.
Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. They don't want to put it all on Facebook, right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Or the cultural one, and I actually sometimes, I wonder if this would describe Google. I mean, Alphabet certainly is sort of the conglomerate, sort of structuralist approach, but then even within Google, I mean, they're famous for having this mentality, at least it seems to me, of we're okay with the idea that we're going to do the same thing 3 different times, and then we're going to cut two, the very DARPA style, then we're going to cut 2 of them and recombine the teams. So I saw this when I was there. They're famous in the industry for chat apps and social networking apps doing this. I mean, they have Allo and Duo and Google Hangouts. And, and it's sort of this model of like, let's just instill this as a culture. Like, this is okay.
1,000 flowers bloom sort of thing. Yeah.
But then, I mean, from the startup perspective, I wonder if this is possible for a small company
to actually do this sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom or more.
Exactly. Because take us. Like, we have finite resources. We're intensely, like all startups, intensely aware of our own resource constraint. And so we can't create subsidiaries. We don't have the army for that. And if we pursue a let 1,000 flowers bloom strategy, it's too low leverage with respect to how we allocate resources. And it also, in a small environment, it also can become sort of a problem of interpersonal conflict.
That's weird. It's like,
we're all buddies.
That is kind of weird. I see. So in a giant company, there are people in this office working on this. Like, you don't even know what people in other offices working on. They have three people working, 3 teams in different places working on, you know, the next browser, the next whatever.
Yeah.
But here it's like you all kind of want to be on the same page. And also, besides, you know, also like you mentioned, you just don't have enough resources to do that. Yeah.
So here's at least, I mean, kind of how I'm thinking about it. I hope this is an okay way to hold the conversation. I'm kind of just like, I've been trying to tease this out over the scope of the weekend.
Rubber duck debugging.
Right.
On the rubber duck.
Do you remember Cal Newport? When you were at CSAIL, was he there?
I don't think we overlap. I mean, I read a lot of his stuff,
So yeah, he's this prolific writer, and he blogged extensively, I think, before he wrote books. And I remember him, I think he was the floor above me, maybe?
Oh, like when you were in grad school. Yeah, well, I was never at grad. Yeah, I never overlapped when I was a postdoc there. Yeah, because he was already a professor. Yeah.
I just knew like there was this guy and he was famous. People were like, "Hey, there's this theory guy," because you know theory people in CS are famous for being like quieter on the quieter side, and they're like, "Oh, there's this theory guy who's just
he writes a lot,
prolific writer, and he writes about productivity." And I read something he wrote at the time that really impacted me, which is essentially this. It was like one of his recipes among many, I'm sure, for productivity, which was, and I'll probably remember the thought wrong because it was like 10 years ago, but it was roughly always have a couple of defined projects like on your plate, and have them be defined, have them be clear, have like clear goals, and then give yourself the flexibility to come to work each day and ask yourself which one most interests you today. And especially if you're in a creative profession, so if you're doing research, if you're in a startup, like something where there's so much art, editorial decision making, creation, trying and failing, that your brain, you know, sometimes you don't get to pick. Like today I'm in the mood to just write, or today I'm in the mood to hammer out bug fixes. And so if you have different stacks of clearly defined goals on your desk and you limit how many they are so you don't get overwhelmed. But then where you introduce the relaxation is, I'm not going to make any promises day over day about which one I work on. That at least my recollection of one of his rules was that.
And one of the, and I think we talked about this a long time ago, is that, you know, because he's in more theoretical work, right, that, you know, the problems you work on are more self-contained, of like, we have this, you know, we're trying to make headway on this proof or that proof or that proof, and there's like 3 or 4 problems we're noodling on. And, you know, it is a little different if you're, say, working on a team and you're in building systems and stuff. But I think at your level now, if you're doing strategy and management and stuff, I think it becomes that same thing again, right? That you know, you can either make headway on, you know, customer acquisition, or on working with a member of your team on hashing a really technical problem, or other things. It is, it's an interesting thing, you know. And it's like another thing is like if you're a writer and you're writing a book, you know, is that the one big thing you're working on, or like, can you have subtasks, right? It's like one day maybe I don't feel like writing a book, I feel like editing something, or I feel like reading what other people have written to get ideas. So I think it's very fractal. I think you can do that strategy, but the nuggets of what you work on may be, you know, different levels. But yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
So here's the leap, and this is where I feel like everything thus far, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of basically just trying to organize things I've read over the years, and then here's the jump, and I'm not sure if this is sound, but kind of that we're playing with here. Is, so could you then stack kind of Cal's ideas as sort of a structural answer to, at the small scale, at the startup scale, to some of these big problems that high growth startups have? Where on the one hand, you know, we have every point on that S curve that we experience. So we're, you know, if you walk out to outside the conference room, you know, there are folks who are working on entirely experimental ideas that who knows if they're going to work, and we're completely fine saying, that didn't work if they don't. We have apps that are sort of in beta right now, where we have customers that are really excited about them. They're not quite ready for production, and it's like the marathon of you gotta get it done. And then there's sort of that really high at the top of the S curve kind of development that we do, where we have capabilities and apps that have been in production now in the financial industry for like up to 2 years in some cases.
Well, it's pretty long in startup years.
Yeah, pretty long in startup years. We have like, you know, gray hair in startup years in that respect with production. And the kinds of work that we need to do with those are largely interrupt driven. It'll be, you know, a customer has a need, a specific need or a problem, or finds a bug, and we need to essentially improve some subtle feature.
Yeah, you want to keep the trains running. And it reminds me of, you know, going back to the Google example, right? There was, there were ad systems in the early days, at least. That's the bread and butter, right? Like that's the part that works and is making the money, and then that can fund some of the other stuff that's coming. Gmail is coming up the pipe, in 2003, 2004, and then they acquired YouTube and all that stuff. So do you think that's typical for startups to have this thing, or do you think this is something that's more innovative? You're trying to push that you have the people on the the more experimental end.
I don't know. And I mean, I think like any things, I think it's complicated because I think it's certainly true. So take us, we do a lot of machine learning. Like a lot of our apps are done with machine learning as some of the core engines running behind it. And so it's definitely true that there exist experts, and the best leverage is to use the expert for their areas of expertise. If I'm an OCR expert or a deep learning expert, it's probably not a high leverage activity for me to be doing front end coding or to be doing bug fixing. But at the same time, I think a lot of what makes a small startup really fly is kind of like the Borg-like fully connectedness of the team. And as we grow, and I think this relates to why I said high growth startups specifically, and like how I'm trying to unpack it. It wasn't really to tickle our own ego, but rather one of the things you find yourself needing to do is start to institutionalize some of the behaviors that before you didn't have to think about. Because before, everybody was in such a small group.
You could fit around a table.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We'd all
now
fit
you
to
fit
this
in.
room.
Now you fit in a room, but before you all fit literally around a round table. No, I'm good. I'm trying to get the volume up a little bit. We're good. We're good. So I
think in part it's sort of, obviously there's a spectrum. Some people will need to just, if you're what's that famous violin?
Yo-yo
Monticello violin. There's that kind of violin, the Stradivarius. If you were born to play the Stradivarius, play the Stradivarius. But I think for most people, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm in this category. Like, really, the goal is how do you figure out a way to lay down a way of working, like principles for how we go about selecting work, organizing what we do each day, that help us instill at scale and as we grow fast, that fully connected style of work where we're all helping each other out, we're all getting the opportunity to try crazy ideas, because everybody has crazy ideas. And you don't want to bias. I think there's a mistake where sometimes people think innovation means hard thing. So it would be a mistake to say innovation means a machine learning model, because that's not true. Like, innovation could be a new UI or a new color scheme, or it could be a different way of organizing the code base or a different CI/CD system.
So would you equate innovation with applied creativity? It's kind of like letting someone's creative urges be manifested in some productive way, right? That and I think I was talking to Adam Marcus and folks about this indirectly. It's that at places that are a dozen or a few dozen people, you get to know everyone, and you want to foster everyone's own career growth and everyone's own sense of creativity, right? Because you're not at the stage where it's so big that everyone just has one part to do. But on the other hand, you have this conflicting issue of stuff needs to move forward, right? That if everybody just went off in 100 different directions, then it's not very cohesive either. So I think it is really, and especially if you want to hire good people, right? If you want to hire really good, creative, hardworking people want to feel that they are being creative at work and such.
Totally.
And that's
and I think the risk is when you're growing fast and new people are coming on board, I don't know if this is actually true. I certainly feel hyper aware of this. There's this risk of pigeonholing them into a kind of work that's monotonous and maybe with, especially one, just to themselves, but then also with respect to how the rest of the team operates. And so, like on the S-curve, the super creative, like applied creativity, that's at the beginning. The sort of like we need to get stuff done, that's in the middle. And then we can't allow a customer to be blocked by us, that's on the end. And so you want to make sure that no one person gets monopoly over any one thing, because it would be suboptimal with respect to the team as a whole. And so, and maybe some people are naturally better at certain kinds of work, and in some ways, man, even better, because then if we're all doing a little bit, like if I come into work and I have a stack on the beginning of the S-curve, a stack in the middle of the S-curve, a stack on the end. Now there may be very real calendar constraints that compel me to work on one over the other, and you can't ignore that. But on the flip side, maybe today I'm just feeling like I'm in this section of the S-curve day and somebody else is really good at it, and it kind of gives me a structural excuse to interact with them. It kind of structurally allows different kinds of mentorship to exist.
So I guess one extreme view of this would be, I spent some time at the Recurse Center, which used to be called Hacker School, and they were not a they're more of an educational sort of thing instead of we're going to make a product. But what they did at the beginning of every day, I don't know if they still do anymore because they're much bigger, but they could have everyone basically stand around in a circle. I think they broke them into smaller groups because they grew bigger. So they have these facilitators who were kind of the mentors.
Yeah.
And I think they broke them up into groups, and each circle had, a dozen or 15 or 20 people.
Yeah.
And they would just go around like literally 1 minute, just say, what you plan to do today, right? And all this was people working on their independent projects, right? And I'm just thinking one extreme version of this for a startup is if you have 10, 20 people, you do the circle every morning, and it's just like super briefly. It's like, all right, today I feel like being on this part of that curve. I feel like doing this. And then someone's like, oh, wow, we're both doing this. Let's go and sit together and see if we can help each other out. Or like, oh, maybe we should, maybe like if everyone is working on this part today, maybe we should, split it up so that you take this part next day or something. I mean, it's hard to scale, obviously, right? By definition.
So hard.
That would be, so it seems like you want a global, you want at first for yourself, getting up every morning and having a few things and being able to pick the one you're motivated by. But then as an organization, you want people to do that as well. And that's much harder, but it's, that's ultimately what you want to get to.
There's this interesting, I don't know what you would call it, like multi-resolutional or fractal element to all of this, where it's sort of the same problem is felt by a person or a team is felt by the company as a whole, for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you experience this in academia? Because I'm sure, it's a similar thing where you have to write writing the paper, some people love it.
Awesome cows right there.
Yeah, it's a good wallpaper.
A cow cameo here.
This is the PG Bovine special.
I know, we can't even, we'll turn the camera around, see the proprietary cow images. No, it's a great question. I mean, I feel like as faculty, we do a bit of both, right? So I both do a bunch of individual work that I need to get done, right? And it's not just research, right? It's teaching, it's service work, it's administrative work, it's a bunch of different things. And then also I'm supervising a research group and I'm advising students on their work. So in a managerial sense, I think for me, I think I've gotten my Cal Newport thing down pretty well, which is, I think it's just, there's always so much stuff that's coming in that you just kind of prioritize what you feel like at the time, unless there's something super urgent. I think the issue with the group cohesion doesn't matter as much because people are more working on individual researchy projects, right? So I think if you were to run a large systems group where everybody is working on one big system, then it's almost like a startup, right? I mean, the people on the 9th floor in CSAIL, right? These large scale distributed systems sort of research groups, right. Or like a Berkeley, right? So Berkeley famously had these labs that did stuff like Postgres and the RAD lab, AMPLab, all that. I mean, to one scale, those things are multi-grad student team projects. Right. But for a lot of research, it's more individualistic, right? Everyone is doing their own thing, and then I'm advising them, and we're iterating and such. So, I think for me, I don't have any super surprising things to add there, other than I definitely agree with you that it is important to have those few piles, because when you're in a creative profession, you're not always, and sometimes you're tired, right? You don't want to move forward on something really hard. There's just easy stuff you can do, so just do that, and then you just kind of know. I think my take on the whole Cal Newport thing is, as long as you're kind of marching forward every day a bit at a time towards some direction that's on the right vector, in the right direction, it should be okay, right? Because things will just shake out. But it's easier. I mean, I don't think it's easy to teach this stuff, because I think it's only after a lot of experience you get.
Yeah. With a lot of this, I wonder I never went to business school, so I have no idea if there's a class maybe. You
can just take whether it's wow, this is such a clear way to think about it, or whether it's just being, this metacognitive skill, being aware of your own mood, I think is super important. So talking about this productivity or creativity thing, I think just being really self-aware and in tune, very similar to how athletes, or just not just athletes, people who are in good physical shape are very in tune with their bodies, right? Yeah. They know to work themselves hard, but not to injure themselves, and to take plenty of rest, and to get hydrated and eat well and everything. Yeah. I think it's similar to kind of creative mental work.
Yeah. I think the being attentive to mood is interesting, and then also the being attentive to there's a lot of empathy really involved. And that empathy can be incredibly tactical too, because one of the things that starts to happen
to yourself or to others?
To others. Okay. Yeah. Both yourself too. I guess you have to be able to monitor yourself, what do I feel like doing? But then also, as you start to get larger, and I guess maybe the academic equivalent of this would be collaboration across the department. Yep. You start to realize there's sort of these problem for problem, topic for topic. there's these combos or trios that
Of
you
people
can come
that,
up with.
yeah,
Where holy cow, if you can like put those people
Yeah.
in a room together, really interesting things happen.
Yeah, and I think this
That's-
is more. I think we're almost out of time on
Are we
this.
at the-
We'll
okay.
run down the clock. It's like these things are only 30-minute clips.
How
So
does
we'll
this work? Oh, you
run
got a
down the
timer
clock.
there.
We'll run down
Okay.
the clock here.
Yeah.
and
Bye,
I'll just
everybody.
splice it
After this
together.
commercial break,
We'll
be
like
back.
change shirts, change places, change shirts. Forgot where we started. We're doing a Zoolander stare down. What was I saying about the other groups or the?
We've really only been here like 2 seconds since we
Yeah,
turned
yeah.
off, and we've forgotten where we were.
Age is showing it.
That's maybe that's what it is to be in the what do they call it, the flow or something.
Yeah.
You get kicked out. It's like getting kicked out of the
Yeah.
warp channel.
Gotta work.
The Starship Enterprise just falls.
We have to
out.
do this. We do the shakes.
Right. We were talking about groups, pairing people up.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Collaborating across
that
the department.
reminds me of people who run research labs. So like a lot of these are in industry because as you know, as faculty, you don't have a large lab usually. I mean, you might, but like I think the this is really similar. We're talking about reading about people who are research managers. Like how do you at Microsoft Research or at Xerox or at Bell Labs, what makes for a good research manager, right? That you obviously had to come up in the research world yourself and establish yourself, and now you're in the position of managing, a dozen, 2 dozen or so, or even more researchers. How do you make that magic happen, right? And I think part of that is exactly getting people into place and like having, empathy and seeing, oh wow, these 2 or 3 people, you all could do a project together that could be amazing, right?
Yeah.
That like, of course you want everyone to have ownership and you don't want, you don't want them to feel like, oh, I just put you 2-3 together and, marching orders, you have to do something. But like, you want this to feel so organic that like you provide that environment, those people just come together and do something that they couldn't have done by themselves, right? I think it's really similar in this setting, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the industry version of that, because oftentimes a company's product, like in academia, the expertise tends to be, what am I trying to say? It's all of the same equivalent nature. Like I might be a biology expert, you might be a computer science expert, and so we kind of bring together 2 things that in some regards are very like, but they're directed in a different direction. Whereas I think in industry, what tends to happen is the product is in one direction by and large. And so then what happens is the different kinds of expertise are very different in the feel of it. Like a biology professor and a computer science professor will both be writing papers.
Yep,
They'll
you're
both be
doing the
conducting
same kinds of
experiments.
things.
Kind of
Your
thing.
domain knowledge is different, but you're doing
Exactly.
the same job, pretty much. Yeah.
Whereas somebody who's a wizard at CI/CD systems or setting up a development environment, development tools, somebody who's amazing at writing tests or debugging, somebody who's amazing at UI, somebody who's amazing at ML, those are very different jobs.
And it's different cultures and different, perhaps ways of interacting, right? And different value systems, right? So people who are, hardcore designers have a certain value system. People who are system bin people have a certain value, back-end folks have a certain values. And the business people in different regards.
Yeah, and it really, I see the world largely through pretty rosy glasses, but it creates a very fun dynamic where a lot of times people are in that little niche that they're in because they really love that, and sometimes kind of don't care for some of the other styles of work, even though it's critically important. And so you get this wonderful relationship where you're like, oh, I'm so thankful that you do what you do because I don't like it, and vice versa.
Yep.
And the other person feels that way about you, which I think is very nice.
Yeah, and you feel like, I think that's one of the things, without getting derailed too much, but I think, the thing you mentioned about the, in an academic environment, or even in a, industry research, I would say, in a research environment where people have PhDs and the goal is to be making prototypes or doing studies and writing papers or patents or whatever, you're absolutely right that everyone has different domain knowledge, but pretty much they're, the neural net layer underneath, right? That first layer, that last layer of the neural net is their domain knowledge, right? And the fundamental layer of the whole research pipeline and understanding how research works is fairly similar.
Yeah.
But whereas, you're saying in more of a startup or a, production-oriented setting, you have people that have, their deep layers, whichever layers of neural net is actually really different from each other. So, I think that's something that's missing oftentimes in a research environment, that it is more of a monoculture in the sense of, okay, you can put your heads together, you can, mix up field A and field B and make something cool, but fundamentally the people are all, we all have a certain operating system in our heads, right, of doing research. And I think that's something that that experience in research people lack of actually having I don't know what it's called, a cross-functional team
Yeah.
or something, whatever the buzzword is. Right?
Do you feel like Berkeley, because this is, I associate Berkeley with this kind of cross-functional work. Like the thing, if you look at the kinds of things that come out of their computer science department, they tend to be these large open source projects where it's not just research. They've done a significant software development effort. Do you feel like that achieves that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the closest, I think. And, maybe, the adjacent side to academic research is open source innovation, right? And open source sustainability. So, marrying those two seems to, to have a certain amount of success. And, there are other research infrastructure projects in academia that do that. And then, if you want to add the third leg on it, would be the entrepreneurship, right? The spin-off, the companies out of these, these technologies and such. But, I don't think every lab needs to do that, right? I mean, I think it's just a kind of model that is in certain places. And they have a legacy of doing that so they can attract the funding and the people and the long-term relationships with funders who get this sort of model and such. Right. But yeah, what else is on your blog thing?
I don't know, man.
That was,
just
ran
by,
off.
Just getting by.
So I think you're writing up something on this, right? Or,
I am. Well, so this is something we've been thinking about a lot because we're Instabase is we have 4 offices around the world now. And it's a wild ride. We're just having to address entirely new categories of conversation and organization and planning that just don't even come up when you're in a small team because everybody's sort of operating on modulated to the exact same wavelength. So it's exciting. It's really fun, but we definitely are trying to be non-ad hoc. Is that even a word? We're trying to be extremely intentional about it and really look
and you think the default for startups at your size is just to go for whatever and it's like super chaotic and you feel you want to be just less chaotic than that?
I think that there's an inherent chaoticness to startups because that, especially pre-product market fit. I mean, this is obviously like a little bit of an exaggeration, but to some degree of approximation, you're kind of just throwing everything all over the place and seeing what'll stick. Obviously, while trying to maintain sort of a controlled public face and story, because from the customer standpoint, they need to see you as stable. But internally, I mean, you're just trying everything. And then once you cross that product market fit line, and there's even debate as to whether or not product market fit is a sensical concept that exists because you're always trying to do better. You're always trying to figure out how do we deliver value. But
it's not like there's one day where we're done. Let's just maintain this stuff and we'll be making money forever. Right?
I had a friend.
Industry never changes.
With CloudStitch, I was because I feel like we never really made it over that line with CloudStitch. So CloudStitch was my previous startup, and I was walking with my friend Jenny. And just saying like, man, how do we know when we find product market fit? And she said, wasn't there some famous senator testimony about pornography?
Where when you see it.
When you see it. And she was like, you've achieved product market fit because you just, like you wake up one day and there's so many people asking you to add features or fix bugs or can they sign up? Or can
so there is you feel like there is a demarcation somehow.
Well, it definitely feels different. So it's not that there's a line that you cross and like this, Tuesday, April 22nd, you've achieved it. But I think there definitely is a like night and day difference in terms of what it feels like.
Yeah, so maybe like per quarter, right? So maybe over a 3-month span, you feel like, wow, like, in December, we're really struggling along. And now by March, like everyone's calling us about features related to this thing right there, right?
It's less, oh my God, what do we do? And more, oh my God, how are we going to keep up? You feel yourself, I think authors actually say, like when you read about authors and their process, writing like long narratives and things like this, there's this interesting phenomenon that seems to happen about halfway through the book where at the beginning of the book, it's all hopes and dreams. anything I dream up. If a pirate enters in chapter 2, okay, because why not? But by the time you're on chapter 10 or whatever,
things there's a set of rules. So
you're along for the ride.
Right, you got to keep going. You can't just throw a surprise.
And so it's this weird experience of you being simultaneously in control, but also subject to all of the decisions which have preceded you that you may have even been the direct maker of. Right, you're like, what idiot made that decision
so you have to
share your future with your past.
Yeah, it's like, what idiot decided this path? Oh, that was me last year, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that was me last year.
Yeah, it's a business equivalent of like, who wrote this code? Oh, wait, that was me. So, why were we talking about... what was the branch off of which we forked?
Yeah, this is way too many things. Well, speaking of that, I mean, now we're talking about forking and branching. I was thinking about this analogy. The first 10, 15 minutes is it almost seems like you want kind of this operating system scheduler, right? I mean, like an operating system, in the most general sense, is a way to manage resources for applications, right? So imagining your organization or your leadership as an operating system, right? You're providing abstractions for people who work, your employees and your partners, and then you're also providing scheduling in a way, right? So it's like there are some heuristics for optimally scheduling stuff, right? You don't want people to be thrashing, you don't want people to wait on each other. There are certain strategic times to double down on certain things. And I think about this a lot just personally, just for myself, because I mostly manage my own work. And it's like this, it's really this optimal scheduling issue. Taking into account people's, own wetware of their bodies and their minds and fatigue levels, morale levels, right? Like, sustainability is another thing, right? I mean, startups are notorious for people, overwork is an issue, all the time. So it's like, sustainability and being in it for the long end. These are hard problems.
And I think actually maybe that's a really great thought to kind of bring it all the way back to the beginning and kind of put a period on the initiating thought. So like the last thread where we forked, it was you had asked why are you being essentially our startups ad hoc about this.
Oh yeah,
so
that's right. Are all startups just chaotic?
Yeah, chaotic.
Are you trying to be more?
I think the operating system comment both relates to that, but then also the initial question, which is, so you have this period of chaos. You hit this situation where all of a sudden you come into work and you find yourself more constrained by resources available and decisions you could make than what's working. I mean, obviously, you're always trying to slog through it, but at a certain point, it's a very different kind of decision making you have to start making. And so one of the things you realize is at scale, where not everybody's in the same room, where you need to set up principles so you can consistently and reliably act, so you can grow without chaos. It's almost like you have to figure out, okay, what's the operating system for our kind of product, for our culture team, for our kind of company, and then it might not be prescriptive of your decision making. Like I don't think you could come into work and a computer will print out a ticker tape of like here's what you will do today, but at least it does provide at least some fixed points within which you are aware of the parameterization that you've pre-decided on. And so, not all models are good, but it provides a really good scaffold on top of which you can then.
So do you feel like having external deadlines or even internal deadlines is one way to start working backwards? I mean, or is it too hard to have deadlines in this sort of world? I mean, because one way is, if you have deadlines, it's like, we need to do this by this day. Then we work backwards and think, how do we achieve that?
100%. And we do that. I mean, we do yearly planning, quarterly planning, weekly planning. I mean, it's funny. I was on a conference call at home on speakerphone the other day. And I hung up, and my wife Grace was like, "Wow, you all sound like. At what point did you start sounding like a real company because of the scope of this?" But yeah, like planning, and then another one that I absolutely love is Anant Bhardwaj, our CEO, instituted this practice of sort of at the company level, at the team level, at the quite nearly the individual work level, but not entirely, to organize your thinking into mission, strategy, structure, and staff. So first you have to know why you're doing what you're doing. Then you have to have a strategy for how we're going to be competitive at it or how we're going to do it well. Then you have to figure out what are the structures. So this would be things like schedules, or this would be things like...
it's like the who, what, when, where, why.
Exactly,
kind of.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of corresponds to that.
And then you have to have a staffing plan for it. And what's beautiful about it is it works at the company level, it works at the 5-year goal level.
And the individual too.
And it works at the individual level. And so we've really tried to institute, like that's another example, I think, with this innovation, like how do we unpack this sustained innovation question? That's an example I think of how do we institutionalize a style of decision making that allows us, even if I don't know another employee or even if I'm not, day-to-day interacting, I can at least look at sort of the core questions and we're both spun up on here's the structure through which we can understand why we're doing what we're doing, how it is we might be interacting.
Yeah, so I like this. So as a knowledge base, if everyone has this in the database there, then you can quickly ramp someone up, or you just look over someone's file. Oh yeah, like this is roughly what they've been thinking.
Precisely. If you're new to the team, if you're going to visit an office.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because at bigger companies, at a place like they do these OKRs, or these quarterly, I don't know, quarterly or monthly or whatever things where it's like, or weekly snippets of like, oh, this is what I did, this is what worked or didn't work.
Yeah.
And those are good as reflection, but I like this idea of even putting more structure on it,
Yeah.
right? Because otherwise when people just write, I wrote, I checked in 1,000 lines of code and I went to a design meeting and say, oh, that's great, you did all that, but I don't know why. I don't know
Right.
what's the meaning behind it. And I feel like maybe a lot of times in these larger organizations, they just do it because that's what they were assigned to do, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I just did this because that was what my team is doing this week. So.
Exactly. And the risk is that you spend all this time kind of tracking the fact that you're pedaling a bicycle, but you don't have the map that explains why you're pedaling the bicycle.
That's really interesting. I mean, I've been thinking about that a little bit in terms of like research management as well. I mean, I don't have any giant scale, I don't have scaling issues, but like, usually what it is, we plan from, paper deadlines and project deadlines and stuff, and then we have informal milestones until then. And, usually the whys are, because, in academia, publishing papers is the thing, right? So the existential question is much more clear because, at least from the student's perspective is that, if you're here for your PhD, you're expected to publish a few papers, and then you can, you go on to academic job or industry job or whatever job, but your primary outputs are these things that you build or experiments you run, and you work on these papers. So I feel like existentially it's more clear. Obviously publishing has ups and downs and challenges and randomness and everything, but I think establishing that is key. But I think that in a company it may be harder unless it's literally like, you're on Wall Street. It's like, we do this because we make this much money. So press the button here so that we make this much money.
Yeah.
But for what many people do, it's not like you have a dollar sign thing somewhere that's just like a bar that's rising. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess once you have a CFO, maybe you do. I don't know how that works. I talked maybe just a funny joke to throw in related to the Wall Street comment. I have a friend who effectively started a bank. And he wasn't a finance guy. And I was like, why did you start a bank? And he described it as, and I don't agree with this view, I should state. But,
disclaimer. Don't start.
But he described it as all variants of business are, how did he call it? You're essentially different translational layers away from just tapping in straight to the Federal Reserve. And so you might as well start a bank because then you're directly tapped in. It's like, all right.
The IV. Just go for that. It's like, why drink Soylent when you can just have an IV drip
exactly.
right to your body, right?
Exactly.
You have an IV drip. You just get energy from the sun directly. Just photosynthesize. You don't have to go through eating or.
Yeah. There's no conduit through which you have like a efficiency loss or something like that. Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming. I'm glad. It was helpful to get to try this out on somebody.
I
don't know if it was wise for me to have it be recorded the first time I ever spoke it aloud.
But it looks like we're at a deposition, whatever, you're under oath. This is what the deposition rooms look like.
Actually, since we have, I don't know how many people are going to be watching this. I hope zillions. A really fun thing to watch. I found myself captivated by the Bill Gates depositions.
Oh, yeah.
They're amazing.
Yeah. I've heard about these.
Days and days of them. I think it's like 4 days or something like that. But they're available on YouTube. You can just pop them in your headphones. And that was about a month ago. That was my entertainment to and from work.
Just listening to Bill
day.
Gates one-liners.
It's unbelievable. Well, because you and I both grew up where this was. I mean, we were in like middle school, high school in the 90s.
Whole antitrust Microsoft case.
And so I had this sort of abstract idea of what was going on. I kind of knew that there was some browser stuff and there was this thing called Java. And now Gates largely is modeled as like a kind of a benevolent giver of money to various causes. And so there's like sort of today Gates, and then there's 90s Gates. And then to listen to the lawyers kind of walk him through all the questions. And I think the one thing that was amazing to me was how adept he was at just infuriating the lawyers. And I say that without value judgment.
The ultimate troll.
You could pitch that in a good way, you could pitch it in a bad way, but it's just fascinating to watch I guess what it looks like when somebody clearly has been prepared by just an armada of legal assistants
to exactly
very carefully
navigate
his way through it. It's unbelievable. It's really, really entertaining. So that's my recommendation.
Wow. All right. That was a curveball right there. Well, I guess we're speaking about depositions and such. Wow. Yeah. I don't have much firsthand knowledge of that beyond just random clips. But hopefully one day you won't be in that hot seat.
The
Benson deposition files The antitrust case files. All right, we're going to sign
Okay.
off.